Have you ever wondered why the rise of Black Americans provokes more fear, more opposition, and more effort to suppress than any other movement on earth? Why does their progress ignite such panic in the halls of power? And why do calls for justice from this community seem to shake entire systems rather than simply stir debate? Deuteronomy 28:13 declares that God's people will be the head and not the tail, above only and not beneath. If this promise is real, and if it was never revoked, what happens when a people begin to remember who they truly are? This isn't just a question about politics or culture. It's a question about covenant, about prophecy, about what terrifies those who have built their power on keeping others from their God-given position. Stay with me, because in the next few moments, we're going to open a door into a story the Bible has been telling for thousands of years, a story hidden in plain sight, unfolding right now, and capable of reshaping how you see history, identity, and your own calling. Don't miss this. Covenant fear, the ancient root. The Bible is not just a book of moral lessons, it is a covenant contract between God and His people. Like any contract, it carries binding terms, promises, and consequences. In Deuteronomy 28:13, God declares, "The Lord will make you the head and not the tail, and you shall be above only and not beneath." This is positional language. It is not symbolic suggestion. It is covenant authority. And here lies the root of fear: what happens when a people awaken to promises that cannot be revoked by human hands. Think of Luke 4, where Jesus stood in the synagogue and read from Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, to proclaim liberty to the captives." In that moment, he wasn't offering gentle encouragement. He was proclaiming systemic disruption. He was declaring war against oppression itself. To his audience, it was terrifying. To rulers and religious authorities, it was unacceptable. That same covenant reality still terrifies systems built on control today. When people of African heritage in America rediscover that these promises are not abstract, but living, when they embrace the idea that their place is above only, the fear it generates is not cultural, it is covenantal. It strikes at the very foundation of illegitimate power. Some may dismiss this as speculation, arguing that these promises were for ancient Israel alone. But when viewed in light of prophecy about dispersion and regathering across the nations, the question grows sharper: what if these words are echoing into our own time, right now? Stay with me, because the fear doesn't stop at Scripture. It is echoed throughout history in patterns that repeat with haunting precision. Historical fear, the pattern of awakening. Imagine the corridors of Pharaoh's palace in ancient Egypt. The economy depended on slave labor, and one man, Moses, dared to proclaim that God demanded release. Exodus 3:20 records, God's response: "I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, He will let you go." The plagues dismantled not only Pharaoh's pride, but Egypt's entire economic foundation. History shows us that oppression thrives on exploitation, and liberation threatens the survival of unjust systems. Fast forward to America's own story. Enslaved Africans were not simply property in an economic sense. They were the backbone of an empire's wealth. When whispers of freedom turned into songs of deliverance, when figures like Harriet Tubman followed prophetic conviction to liberate captives, fear rippled across the South. It wasn't just the loss of labor, it was the terror of a people awakening to divine destiny. Reconstruction later gave a glimpse of what covenant restoration could look like. Black senators, governors, entrepreneurs, and educators reshaping society within a single generation. And yet the backlash was swift and violent lynchings, Jim Crow laws, and massacres meant to crush what had begun to rise. This pattern is not isolated. From Babylon's captivity to Rome's persecution of the early church, from the civil rights era to modern surveillance of justice movements, the cycle repeats. Oppressors believe they have silenced covenant people, but history always rhymes with awakening. And every time the pattern resurfaces, it grows harder to suppress. So what does this mean for us today? If history shows that every awakening unleashes fear and resistance, then the fear we see in our present moment is not random, it's confirmation. But this fear is no longer confined to politics or economics. It has spread into culture itself, where music, art, and creativity become battlegrounds of spiritual identity. Cultural fear, creativity as covenant power. Picture this: a smoky jazz club in Harlem, 1930s. The air is electric. A horn player steps into a solo that defies structure, breaks the rules of European harmony, and somehow pulls the entire room into a deeper space. But this isn't just performance, it's prophecy. It's an act of defiance against cultural containment. Jazz wasn't merely a genre, it was a new way of thinking, a circular, collaborative, deeply spiritual rhythm that shattered the linear logic of the Western world. When white America first encountered it, fascination was quickly followed by fear. Why? Because it was free. It was uncontained, and it was undeniably powerful. That same pattern played out again with hip-hop. Born in the Bronx, raised on struggle, hip-hop began as a cry for justice. Public Enemy declared, "Fight the power," not just as a slogan, but as a spiritual alarm. Kendrick Lamar's verses, laced with theological language and historical pain, became psalms for a new generation. These weren't just entertainers. They were prophets in sneakers and hoodies. And yet, the moment this cultural power began to awaken consciousness, the machinery of suppression went into motion. Record labels flooded the industry with artists promoting drugs and violence. Conscious artists were pushed to the margins. Cultural creativity was manipulated to serve the very systems it once challenged. But even that couldn't stop the truth. The internet broke the monopoly. Independent creators began producing content that connected African identity directly to biblical calling, bypassing gatekeepers. This is why culture has become one of the fiercest battlefields in the war over covenant identity. Because creativity is not a side effect of awakening, it is a weapon. A weapon that breaks chains, shatters stereotypes, and reclaims the image of God in places where it was once distorted. And if culture is the expression of covenant power, what happens when millions begin to speak, sing, paint, dance, and build from that awakened place? We're already seeing it, and it's sending tremors through systems built on silence. Modern fear, the global awakening. I remember scrolling through my feed late one night when I came across a short video just a few minutes long. It showed a group of young men in Nigeria quoting Deuteronomy from memory, tracing the lineage of the Israelites to African tribes. The comment section was on fire. People from Jamaica, the US, Brazil, Ghana, the UK, all saying the same thing. I've always felt this. Now I know it's real. There's something happening right now that no government, no institution, no algorithm can stop. This isn't just a cultural moment, it's a spiritual movement. Across continents, people are waking up to their identity not as victims of history, but as heirs of covenant. We now have archaeological discoveries supporting African presence in ancient biblical lands. DNA evidence confirming historical connections once dismissed. Scholars challenging Eurocentric biblical interpretations with linguistic and geographical truth. And most importantly, we have technology that allows truth to travel farther and faster than ever before. But with awakening comes resistance. We've all seen it. Videos demonetized, posts shadow banned, entire channels wiped out for teaching scripture through an African lens. It's not about violating guidelines, it's about violating narratives. Narratives that depend on Black communities staying confused, divided, or asleep. And yet, every attempt to suppress seems to do the opposite. Every act of censorship becomes fuel for more searching. Every deleted post sparks a dozen more uploads. This movement is not dependent on platforms, it's driven by prophecy. Isaiah 11 says, God will gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. That's not poetry, it's happening. Through social media prayer calls, Bible studies, even blockchain-based economic systems, the scattered are reconnecting. So when you hear that certain ideas are too controversial, ask yourself, controversial to whom? Because the only people who fear this awakening are the ones who benefit from others staying asleep. And when you realize that fear, you'll see that the most powerful thing about this movement isn't what it opposes, it's what it reveals. Spiritual fear, dominion, and identity. At the heart of all this fear lies a single truth awakened. People don't just ask for equality, they step into dominion. Scripture calls it plainly. 1 Peter 2:9 describes God's people as a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. Those are not titles of survival. They are positions of rulership, of spiritual government, of covenant authority. And that is what terrifies oppressive systems most. For centuries, the narrative has been framed around assimilation, just fit in, just get along, just prove yourself worthy of a seat at the table. But covenant identity flips that narrative completely. Awakened communities don't beg for inclusion at a broken table, they rebuild the table according to God's specifications. They function as priests who guide nations, as kings who lead with justice as light that attracts rather than excludes. Isaiah 60:3 declares, nations will come to your light and kings to the brightness of your rising. This is the opposite of division. When covenant people rise, they don't push others away, they draw them in. That's why history shows movements led by Black communities sparking global impact. From jazz influencing every genre of music to civil rights inspiring liberation struggles worldwide, the brightness of that rising has always attracted others. And here's the real spiritual fear: systems built on exploitation cannot survive in the presence of people who know who they are. Because when you know you're royal, you refuse to be enslaved. When you know you're priestly, you refuse to be silenced. When you know you're chosen, you stop living as though you're optional. So the question is not whether this awakening will continue. The question is, will you recognize it and will you step into it? Because the time has come when fear no longer defines the narrative faith does. And when covenant people walk in faith, the world itself begins to change. Pause and let that truth sink in. This isn't just about history or culture. It's about destiny, and it's about yours. As we come to the end of this journey, remember that the fear we have uncovered is not ultimately about a people, it is about a promise. It is about what happens when those long considered the tail awaken to the truth that God has already declared them the head. It is about the unsettling power of covenant identity breaking into a world that depends on forgetting. That is why the awakening of Black Americans is not just a cultural shift or a political movement. It is a signpost of God's faithfulness, a reminder that His word never returns void. The lesson is simple yet profound. The world fears what it cannot control, but God's promises are not for sale. No system of oppression, no manipulation of history, no distortion of culture can erase what He has spoken. And so, the real question becomes deeply personal. What will you do with this truth? Will you shrink back in fear, or will you rise into the identity God has already placed upon you? In our modern struggles with purpose, belonging, and identity, this message offers more than comfort. It offers clarity. You are not an accident. You are not powerless. You are not forgotten. You are part of a covenant story still unfolding, and your place in it matters more than you may realize. Thank you for walking through this sacred exploration with me. If this message has stirred your spirit, I invite you to like this video, share it with others who need encouragement, and subscribe so you never miss the next revelation we uncover together. Your engagement doesn't just help this channel, it helps spread truth that cannot be silenced. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May He give you courage to walk boldly in your calling wisdom, to discern His hand in history and peace, to know that you are exactly where He has placed you for such a time as this. Until we meet again in the next mystery, go forth in faith, go forth in strength, and go forth knowing you are loved beyond measure. As we come to the end of this journey, remember that the fear we have uncovered is not ultimately about a people, it is about a promise. It is about what happens when those long considered the tale awaken to the truth that God has already declared them the head. It is about the unsettling power of covenant identity breaking into a world that depends on forgetting. That is why the awakening of Black Americans is not just a cultural shift or a political movement. It is a signpost of God's faithfulness, a reminder that His word never returns void. The lesson is simple yet profound. The world fears what it cannot control, but God's promises are not for sale. No system of oppression, no manipulation of history, no distortion of culture can erase what He has spoken. And so the real question becomes deeply personal. What will you do with this truth? Will you shrink back in fear, or will you rise into the identity God has already placed upon you? In our modern struggles with purpose, belonging, and identity, this message offers more than comfort. It offers clarity. You are not an accident. You are not powerless. You are not forgotten. You are part of a covenant story still unfolding, and your place in it matters more than you may realize. Thank you for walking through this sacred exploration with me. If this message has stirred your spirit, I invite you to like this video, share it with others who need encouragement, and subscribe so you never miss the next revelation we uncover together. Your engagement doesn't just help this channel, it helps spread truth that cannot be silenced. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May He give you courage to walk boldly in your calling wisdom, to discern His hand in history, and peace to know that you are exactly where He has placed you for such a time as this. Until we meet again in the next mystery, go forth in faith, go forth in strength, and go forth knowing you are loved beyond measure.